it's fascinating to me when people have someone does you wrong, and what they've done wrong to you is not just maybe ripped you off in business, like they've done something that's illegal, that's immoral, that's unethical, that is criminal.
Mm-hmm.
If someone doesn't pay your legal bill, that's not necessarily something the prosecutor, the DA, is going to pick up on and go on. I'm gonna prosecute this person for theft of services. If you were to file a case against them, saying small claims, they owed you $8,500 and they didn't pay, you went in, get a judgment, file the judgment against any properties they might have, whatever you do to recover fees if you haven't been paid. But if someone rapes you, molests you, tortures you, and you want your day in court, what's the process by which the DA reviews that? Because most civil cases, what's said in court isn't that public record?
So this is really good to hammer out, because I think a lot of people don't understand this, and I didn't understand this before law school. I mean, I didn't even know where laws were written or what the hell was going on. So a big distinction is civil versus criminal.
Right.
Civil cases are filed in civil courts, and it's usually where, I mean, it can be a variety of things, but generally what we're talking about in this context is somebody says, you wronged me in some way, and you owe me some kind of compensation to make me whole again, to fix whatever horrible thing you did to me. And then, on top of that, punitive damages or whatever. And then there's also criminal offenses, and your local county DA is going to be the one generally prosecuting those. It could also be a federal jurisdiction, but let's just pretend like it's happened in we're in Dallas County, I think, right now.
Yeah, this is Dallas County.
Let's say it's like a borderline hybrid. Like this guy went into a contract to get a roof, or went into a contract to perform some kind of roofing services, but never really actually had the intent to do it. He did it fraudulently. Like he came into town. Oh, yeah, I'll do this for you. Just give me several $1,000s and I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. So you could have potentially a claim against him in civil court, and then you would also be a witness in criminal court. And it's the state that proceeds after or goes after him whenever they're trying to prosecute him on a criminal offense.
If you're the plaintiff, though, and you go to, like, the sheriff and you say, this contractor ripped me off, and they're like, oh, that's a civil matter?
That's a common thing they say is, this appears to be a civil matter. What they mean by that is, did you demonstrate to me that you've met all the elements of a criminal offense clearly and convincingly to this officer? And that's a legal term. Is they really just need probable cause on every single one of these elements that somebody did something like, let's say, fraud.
What is probable cause?
It's an amount of facts that convinces a police officer, detective, investigator, whoever, that you have committed a crime. And there's certain elements of every single crime. For example, DWI is I was operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated on a public street. And so if you don't have all those four, if you have somebody that's on their ranch property, we're not on a public highway, and they're driving around drunker than shit and flipping off the cop at the same time, woo! They're not on a public highway. The cop is going to be like, it's not, I mean, it's really dumb of them, but it's not a DWI because it's not a public roadway. And so that's an example, like that's what's going on in their heads is, does this trigger every single one of the elements of this criminal offense? Is there enough facts to where I'm hearing them, not whether there's a counter argument, but is there enough basic facts to demonstrate every single one of these elements, probable cause level? Like we're not having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt every single one of these elements, but is there enough to where I have heard facts that sufficiently demonstrate that this person has committed a criminal offense, which is meeting all the elements? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with civil stuff. It's a much lower burden. It's only the easy way to think about it is criminal stuff is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard in law. Civil stuff is where you're going after somebody. You only have to prove more likely than not. Like think about it like 51%. Like you tip the scale slightly in your favor. If you prove that somebody damaged you and it caused you some kind of expenses and there's a cause of action meaning kind of like criminal stuff where there's elements of the offense, except they have civil causes of action as well. Like you were negligently operating a motor vehicle and proximately caused damages to me, and I suffered some kind of injury. So It's a little bit different and it's a lower standard, but it's the same kind of arguments that they're going to be making. But that's why a lot of times people start screaming at a cop like, "Why are you not prosecuting him? Why is this guy?" Or they'll call the police and say, "This guy is doing whatever he's doing," but the cop is sitting there in his head from his training, being like, "Okay, let me figure out if there is a criminal offense that applies." Which is in the penal code. You can look it up anytime you want to figure out if you have violated a penal code statute. And you go through, and every single one of those elements, like, have each one of these elements been met by some amount of evidence? And if so, then they start thinking, okay, I can go ahead and maybe get a warrant and arrest this guy. Or if I observed it, maybe I can arrest this guy. But before that, they typically are saying, that's a really horrible thing that happened to you, but it sounds like it's civil in nature. That's what they mean is, maybe you don't quite have a criminal offense from what you've told me. A common thing is the hybrid family law courts, hybrid standard, it's kind of in the middle, where somebody takes a child and they like run off, but it's, baby daddy runs off and baby mama calls up police like, "Hey, you just left with my baby." And like, "Well, do you guys have a family law court order?" And like, "Well, no." I'm like, "And that's his dad that took him?" "Yeah." "Okay. Well, that's unfortunately he's allowed to do that because we don't really have a court order that he's violating. It's not a criminal offense. It's not kidnapping. That's his dad. And even though he was never in the kid's life or like, kind of a shitty person, like, you need to go to family law court to hammer that stuff out." So does that kind of make sense?
It
and that's
does.
a bit of a hybrid scenario.
No, I get it. So let's take like the most maybe famous instance where someone was taken to criminal court. I'll explain it. You'll know who I'm talking about. They were found not guilty. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Then the family takes them to civil and wins to bankrupt them, but also to try, don't want this guy living a life of luxury after he sawed somebody's head off with a kitchen knife.
Mm-hmm.
Win in civil, but then the guy's pleading poverty and still writing books. And Ron Goldman's dad is still chasing OJ to this day for money.
I absolutely imagine he is. So, yeah, that's a beautiful, perfect example of the difference in the burdens and like what amount of proof they have to have. So they went after him in criminal court, came back not guilty for whatever reason we don't know.
Because of Rodney King.
But then we go to civil court and they win. It's a much lower standard of evidence that they have to get, and they probably pretty clearly could have won the civil case. Criminal case, I don't know, there were some issues. Johnny Cochran was a total badass. I love that man. But they go over to civil court, they win, and now it's more of, we have this enormous judgment because it was a wrongful death. The jury believed it. They thought more likely than not you did cause this death, whether you were the one stabbing or somebody else. We don't care. You're the one responsible for it. Now you owe us money whenever you write a book later because we don't want to reward that kind of stuff. And so that's where it becomes judgment enforcement, which is a lot crazier. It's probably exactly what you're talking about, where they're having to chase him down. He's writing a new book. Well, we want to get the proceeds of the book because we don't want you to profit from the murder and then you describing what happened during the murder or why you didn't commit it, whatever happened. But he's getting proceeds from that. And so, yeah, that's something that's really, really difficult. That's judgment or collections enforcement. So entirely different animal. Like once you get a judgment, doesn't mean somebody can pay. And that's kind of why personal injury attorneys work in a very certain and distinct way versus many other types of attorneys.